Broadcasting live to the world. Now, it's Sheila Zilinsky. The Sheila Zilinsky Show, the only show to give you the truth behind the headlines, prophecy, and the deeper things of God. Now, here is your host, end-time watchwoman, Sheila Zilinsky.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Saturday night edition of the Sheila Zilinsky Show. This is the last broadcast of 2015. If you are listening tonight on WINB, I need to hear from you, so please get a hold of me. My contact information is there at weekendvigilante.com. And also for new listeners, shoot me an email and let me know how you like the show. All the contact information is there at weekendvigilante.com. I'll be giving out some details about my show format, the new exciting format in 2016. And do not forget to bookmark on your calendar January 4th. I resume shows Monday, January 4th. And on that show, my good friend Steve Quayle joins me for an incredible look at his new book. I just read it, and I have to say, wow. Incredible. And of course, David Langford will be joining me that week along with Russ Dizdar. We've got a fantastic lineup coming out of the shoot January. And if you have not signed up for my newsletter, that's my free e-newsletter, do so on my website, as I will be sending out all the details of the upcoming changes, the new format. There's a lot of changes happening, so please do sign up for my free e-newsletter and be checking the website for all the details. Well, it's my good friend Dave Hodges joining me to weigh in on the insanity. I gave him the nickname, the instigator of the airwaves. We go way back, and it is my pleasure to have him back on. It's always a treat. Dave Hodges, welcome back to the show.
Well, I'm glad to be back with you, Sheila. It's always great being on with you.
Well, Dave, where do you start? I mean, again, it's Caligula-level madness. Terrorists now, Dave, we've talked about this. You've wrote about it. They have more control, more territory, more weapons, more money than they've ever had. We, the people, are unilaterally and systematically being disarmed against our enemies. We're becoming isolated. We're abandoning our allies. We're leaving big chunks of the world open for these subhuman barbarians to get stronger and stronger. Our militaries, let's face it now, so badly degraded while the enemy's on the rise. And let's take a macro view here, Dave. We have fewer combat-ready soldiers since before World War I. We've abandoned our borders. No one in government supports securing the borders. Our politicians simply will not build a secure system for the border. And if you support a secure border and the deportation of people flooding in, well, Dave, you're a racist. And if you dare say anything about, God forbid, Muslims, well, good old Loretta Lynch mob will prosecute you. I mean, we've got border chaos. We've got a reported 750,000 pending immigration cases. They're pushing them through. The courts are in a chaotic backlog. We've got more and more fraudulent shenanigans by the imperial dictator or jihadist in chief, as I call him. We're in a post-constitutional crisis. The appointment clause is under attack. The commerce clause is under attack. The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the Fourth, the Fifth, the Ninth, the 10th. Sounds like a bad Dr. Seuss novel here. We've got the treaty clause. That's newsworthy when you have a president who's conducting himself as a despot. These same frauds that call themselves journalists say nothing about Obama, who's done more to damage our constitutional system than Nixon ever dreamed of. I mean, we can think of 40 impeachable offenses by this jihadist, and we're not allowed to talk about it, Dave.
Well, I would agree with you, and it's we've reached a crisis like I never thought we would see. We have so many things going on at the same time. It's difficult. I mean, I feel like I've got ADHD of the airwaves because so much going on. I don't know which way to look, which way to focus, what to talk about first. It's becoming increasingly difficult to prioritize these threats because they are hitting us with everything, including the kitchen sink. And I suppose a good place to start is Loretta Lynch mob, as you called her. And I got to credit Steve Quayle for coming up with that phrase. That is just an awesome, awesome description of her. First of all, the woman's a criminal. She's got a criminal background. She violates the Constitution every single time she opens up her mouth as the Attorney General. But she has issued threats. There's a document floating around on the Internet. I published it on my website at thecommonsenseshow.com, which basically says that people like myself and Alex Jones and Doug Hagman and et al., you're in that list too, Sheila. And it basically says you're going to be prosecuted for speaking against the refugee resettlement program. Well, excuse me. Let's talk about the refugee resettlement program run by the United Nations, where they're bringing in unscreened, unvetted Muslims from a region of the world that hate our guts. And the FBI has said publicly, we have to consider that at least 10% of these people have hostile intentions and should be considered to be a national security risk. Well, then why aren't we screening them? Do we want more San Bernardinos? And going back to the Loretta Lynch mob, this woman is just incredulous. One day after 14 people had their lives snuffed out by a Muslim ISIS terrorist who hates America, and these families are in terrible mourning as a result, the country is in mourning, and what does Lynch mob do? She goes on the air and says, if you speak out against Muslims in any way, we're going to prosecute you. Not one word about the victims, not one word about the victim's family, and nothing was said about how we should protect America from future attacks. That woman is not suited to hold office. I think she should be sitting in a prison cell with Hillary Clinton for all the laws she's violated. I mean, we are truly living in an America that has been turned upside down.
Well, and speaking at a Muslim advocates dinner on December 3rd, Dave, good old Attorney General Loretta Lynch mob, what were her remarks during that whole stirred controversy? Well, she said, now, obviously, this is a country that is based on free speech, but when it edges towards violence, or we see that potential, well, Dave, lifting the mantle of anti-Muslim rhetoric like we saw after 9/11, all these people who became violent against Muslims, we're not going to put up with that. We need to take action. Of course, then she said, we've had 1,000 investigations into acts of anti-Muslim hatred, including rhetoric and bigoted actions with over 50 prosecutions. So, she's targeting protected free speech. She's targeting the clause of the First Amendment, but she's also saying we're edging on bigoted rhetoric and action. So we can and we will prosecute such wrongful acts, Dave. This is the same woman who, by the way, that Bill Clinton appointed her in 1999 to that same position. This is the same Loretta Lynch, folks, that defended the NSA data collection, the data mining, and she's got on record, Dave, communism and Islamic ties.
Yeah, well, in the background of her press release saying, if you say anything about Islam or Muslims, I suppose even she means truthful statements about Muslims who kill Americans. When she released that statement, Sheila, if you notice in the background, the context of the background, there was a listing of a Muslim organization inside of America. Now, that doesn't bother me that Muslims have organizations. It doesn't bother me they worship. 90% of Muslims are like anybody else. They just want to be left alone to lead their lives. It's the other 10% that I'm worried about. But what does the Attorney General do? She doesn't stand with the red, white, and blue flag in the background. She's standing in front of a backdrop that's advertising for a Muslim organization. Who is she serving?
Well, it's not bad enough you've got Loretta Lynch doing her little free speech chicanery, but then you've got the Judas Paul Ryan. Of course, we know that Congress just approved a $1.1 trillion spending package on Friday that avoids a government shutdown, and it funds federal agencies through to next fall. Like, this is absolutely stunning. People are in an uproar about this, but what is, Dave, the tipping point for the citizenry?
Well, I'll tell you what the tipping point is for Dave Hodges and his civil disobedience. It's the day they tell me that I can't have a gun to protect myself. I agree with Sheriff Joe Arpaio and about 10 other brave sheriffs who've come out across the country who are saying Americans need to arm themselves. You are your first and sometimes only line of defense. You know, Stuart Rhodes was interviewed by myself and James White recently on the Common Sense Show, and he said, when the terrorists are seconds away, law enforcement are minutes away. And I remember Art Bell on his old Coast to Coast program, he used to say, the reason I have a gun is because if I don't have a gun, the police will get there just in time to draw a white line around my cold, dead body. People need to understand, you are on your own. The only thing that law enforcement can do is respond to an attack after the fact. Joe Arpaio, thank God for Sheriff Joe, he has come out and told Americans that what is absolutely the God's honest truth. You need to arm yourself, you need to get trained, you need to practice, you need to store your gun safely, but you better have your gun with you. We are entering a period in American history where it is like the Old West, and yes, it sounds paranoid, but it's true. There literally can be a terrorist around every corner. Why? Because we're not keeping anybody out.
They're not keeping anybody out. In fact, they're letting them flood in. It's another piece of the Islamization of American puzzle, along with the Confederate flag and now monuments. It's a full court press happening as we speak. And concurrent to that, Dave, why are these United Nations deployments happening right on our soil?
Well, they're clearly here, Sheila, and I think I'll scream the next time I hear an ignorant person say they're just a figment of my imagination. We have videos, we have eyewitness accounts from people I know or I've gotten to know, and we have still photos. They're not all photoshopped, folks. These are sincere Americans who recognize a threat when they see it. Why is the UN here? Well, they're here to seize our guns. If you go back to UNOTA, which is basically disarmament from the UN under the Small Arms Treaty, the UN Small Arms Treaty, that John Kerry, as Secretary of State, illegally signed. Folks, think back to your days in American government class in high school. To approve a treaty, it takes a 2/3 majority of the Senate. This issue has never even been before the Senate. The UN has signed treaties with the Obama administration, the Bush administration, to aid the United States in case of civil disobedience. They already know Americans are not going to give up their guns. The UN are marshaling their forces. Now, who are they going to marshal, Sheila? We've talked about this before on your show. There are Russian soldiers who've been training on our soil since 2012. The proof housed at the Common Sense Show and other websites is overwhelming. We have Chinese training on our soil. In fact, it was just last week, 36,000 foreign troops trained under martial law conditions on our soil. We have photos of the Polish troops training in Michigan. The Danes are there as well. They're interacting with the Michigan National Guard. That's going to be the blue-helmeted UN forces that will come against the American people. And folks, these foreigners will have no compunction to shoot Americans. I understand in their martial law drills, and I'm going to quote here from a letter, an email I received, I should say, last summer. When the Danes were training with the Michigan National Guard, they were taught to execute anyone right there on the spot who hesitated and did not immediately comply with getting the guns. They show up at the house, they have a list of who the guns are registered to, and if they don't produce the guns, they carried out mock executions. And I received 2 communications from family members connected to the Michigan National Guard. They were extremely upset. Also, it was Michigan Army Reserves were involved in this. This is insanity, Sheila, but yet this kind of thing is going on all across the country. And I just want to put a cherry on top of this rosy little picture here. Folks, if you want to see how crazy it can get, ask yourself, who is Malik Obama? Malik Obama is the half-brother of Barack Hussein Obama. And what does Malik Obama do? He's in charge of the Muslim Brotherhood's efforts to procure guns, and he's also in charge of their finance. Do I need to say any more when Loretta Lynch mob comes out in support of Muslim terrorists killing American citizens, and she does so without the slightest bit of remorse.
Well, and, again, you're right. You and I have reported for years that foreign troops were operating on U.S. soil. And, of course, now we're getting operational specifics. We see foreign occupational forces. They're training. They're training to overrun this country, I think, in a martial law scenario. Because why foreign troops? Well, obviously, we don't think that our American troops are going to be able to be counted on if they're going to, it comes down to some globalist-inspired hijacking job here. So, why are there 70,000 troops from more than 40 countries participating in what NATO calls, it's just a trident juncture, Dave? We're slowly getting acclimated to the UN positioning itself to take over the U.S., aren't we?
Well, we're positioning to acquiesce to their authority. Absolutely, Sheila. No question about it. Gun control is just the first step. And then it's the melding of the governmental apparatus. Then it's the melding of whatever economic system they want to put us into. This is only a first step, but they have to disarm us so we can't oppose them. And I'm so sorry if I'm going to bore your listening audience with this statistic, but I feel compelled to say it every time the subject comes up. The University of Hawaii has been engaged in something called the Democide Project, where they have measured or counted how many people have been murdered by their government. There are a few facts that have come out of this study that are worth repeating every time this subject comes up. Number one, there were 17 genocides in the 20th century. Number two, every one of those genocides was preceded by gun confiscation to keep the people who were going to be the victims from defending themselves. Number three, government kills far more people than do world wars. The enemy of the people, in most cases, eventually becomes your government.
Well, yes, I absolutely agree. And remember this time last year, Dave, we saw the UN Armed Trade Treaty taking effect. And of course, again, you mentioned John Kerry signing the UN Small Arms Treaty in violation of the U.S. Constitution. I mean, he's sailing us down the ocean corridor on American freedom, our security. He's putting his name on that treaty in violation, what actually states in the Constitution that any treaty has to be approved by 2/3 of Senate vote. How are they getting away with this?
Because we live in a lawless society where the rule of law is whatever the dictator says it is.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Well, and Dave, let's not forget the founders included the words shall not be infringed. What part of shall not be infringed did these lawless, degenerate criminals not get here, Dave?
You said something so salient, and you're not giving yourself enough credit here, Sheila, for really identifying a key issue. This government is hopelessly criminal. And let me just point out a few examples. I've already started with the president and his half-brother. The president also with his illegitimate birth certificate as verified being illegitimate by Sheriff Joe Arpaio and his team of investigators, which is why Sheriff Joe is under constant federal attack. And then you look at the other people that have been affiliated with this administration. Hillary Clinton. Has there been a longer trail of bodies that have ever followed a couple into the White House? And I'm talking husband Bill. And from their allies, Vince Foster on down, who died under the most mysterious of circumstances. And then you've got one of the leading senators, Dianne Feinstein. Mr. and Mrs. Feinstein are worth $1 million when she starts her public service career, but through her conflicts of interest, redirecting government work projects against every law we have that governs us, she is now worth somewhere, about $40 million is what I'm reading, thanks to the American taxpayer. Eric Holder, Fast and Furious. I could go on forever. Almost anyone who's associated with this administration, supportive of this administration in a major way, is nothing but a criminal. They're common criminals that in years gone by in America, they would be in prison right now. And this is who is running the country. I feel like I'm living in Sing Sing, and we've erected fences around the country, and we've called it the United States of Prison. And this is how I feel. And I am scared to death that this lunatic, Hillary Clinton, is going to be elected president. I got to make a decision. Am I going to leave the country? I don't think I can survive under her. I feel I'm going to be targeted, and I'm going to be a marked man.
Yes, the thought of Hillary getting in is quite frightening. And it's not just her trail of dead bodies and her scandalous associations, Dave, or her Saul Alinsky playbook tactics, or her email debacle and on, but it's her targeting of any conservative Christians who speak out, whether it's homosexuality, abortion, Muslims. When Donald Trump called for a total shutdown of Muslims, it's interesting that he actually said over the weekend, Hillary lies like crazy. And of course, ABC News reported yesterday that Donald said that Hillary made up the ISIS video claim. She went on all sorts of late night talk shows last week saying how ridiculous Trump's Muslim comments are. But I agree with the Donald on this one, Dave. Unless they're vetted, these people should not be admitted.
They shouldn't be admitted if they can't prove. I mean, I look at my dad's family when they came in from Germany. Actually, they came in from England via Germany, and they went through a 7-year naturalization period. They had to pass tests on American history, American government, and also be able to pass an English proficiency test. And this was the standard of the day. Today, it's ollie, oxen free. We don't care if you're a terrorist. We don't care if you're a member of the Mexican drug cartels. We don't care if you're a member of the Russian mafia that hacks into our banking computers. We just let everybody in because Obama is seeking to destroy America. You know, I keep saying it. People look at me, you're crazy. Why would a president want to destroy his own country? Why do you think he's there? What did this man ever do to qualify being elected to political office? Let's see. He served one short term in the Illinois State Senate, and the people that sponsored him were Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn, two terrorists who were jailed for their criminal activity associated with the Weatherman Underground. Then he serves 2 years as a U.S. Senator, and all of a sudden someone decides that this man who never held a real job beyond being a community activist is somehow qualified to run the affairs, both domestically and foreign policy of the United States. Are you kidding me? He was put into that position. He's a Manchurian candidate, and he is intent on destroying this country. And if you don't believe me, Ramadan Kareem, he'll say that to Muslims on their day of prayer, but he won't participate in a Christian day of prayer. He'll bring Muslim terrorists into the country. The Christians who are under threat of being beheaded by ISIS in the Middle East need not apply. Stay there and die, Christians. That's what this president's about.
That's what he is about. You mentioned Manchurian candidate. Think about this, folks. The history of Obama. Ann Dunham worked for Timothy Geithner. PSYOPs run by the CIA, the Ford Foundation. Most of Obama's relatives were involved in MKUltra. So he's for sure, as you said, a Manchurian candidate. He was raised by his avowed communist father, who was on the FBI watch list for commie agitators, both sexual perverts. And then enter Valerie Jarrett. Valerie Jarrett, her family married into the Weatherman Underground, Bill Ayers. They launched Obama's political career, and his dad, again, folks, was on the communist watch list. And who was the societal professor of Obama at Occidental College? Well, none other than good old Zbigniew Brzezinski, the creation of a communist born, bred, and raised as a communist. I mean, you cannot make this stuff up, Dave.
I don't even know where to start. It's just, I was reading in a history book recently, a textbook for history, and I was reading about Boss Tweed in Tammany Hall of the 1880s and how corrupt they were and how they stole elections and bribed other public officials, and they worked with the mafia, and they said, like, this was the worst thing. Like, somehow this mess got cleaned up. Well, if it got cleaned up, it got reinvented in this administration. Corruption and graft are the way that these people do business. I mean, I've had on Scott Bennett, U.S. Army, former U.S. Army Special Operations Officer, main consultant to the president on Middle Eastern intelligence affairs. And he came on my show, probably about 9 months ago now, Sheila, and he said, unashamedly, the CIA funds ISIS, and they do it through Swiss bank accounts. He's got lots of cooperation since he came out with that very, very bold comment. Our government is funding the very terrorists who are attacking us inside of our own country. There's
been numerous military government whistleblowing reports with congressional committees. you've got the armed services, you've got Homeland Security, foreign affairs, banking. I mean, when you look at the scandals and abuses of power and the deception, Dave, it's frightening to say the least. And we know on record that ISIS got its beginning from U.S. military equipment. Did you see the plumber's pickup truck from Texas carrying an anti-craft gun for Islamic fighters on the front lines of Syria? Apparently that Mark I plumbing truck is seen in a propaganda photo released by Islamist group Ansar al-Din. Very interesting that vehicle was outfitted with an anti-aircraft gun and is fighting on the front lines in Syria. All these Islamic overtones. You've got the female killer in Las Vegas last night shouting Allah Akbar as she ran over, 40 innocent people. Of course, we're all Muslims, though. Did you see the ridiculous sign Michael Moore held up last week, Dave? This degenerate clown and his antics. It's all absolutely sickening.
Yeah, it's nothing surprises me anymore. I used to be shocked. You know, when I first started writing, Sheila, and seriously writing, and oh gosh, what's it been, maybe 9 or 10 years now? And I remember thinking, maybe I can shame these criminals in Washington into respectable behavior until we can unelect them. Man, was I ever naive in those days. But we've gone from that to where I thought they were engaging in criminal acts against the American people to where they are the criminals. They are the masterminds of their own mafia. I mean, the Obama administration is one of the most sophisticated and brutal mafias on the face of the earth.
Oh, but hey, you're not allowed to say that, Dave. You better watch yourself or one of the clergy response teams might turn you in. Did you know that even in churches now, if you're caught saying things like this, you're being reported? They're looking at people that are opposing these systems and speaking out. You don't dare question your government. I mean, this has morphed into completely Nazi-style censorship at its finest. It's not bad enough that your church pastor is going to turn you in for this kind of speech. But interestingly, because you and I are both former therapists, one of the things that is frightening in the DSM-5 is called ODD, Oppositional Defiance Disorder. Now, that is basically treatable by a profound reorientation of your social skills. That, along with certain drugs, is sure to have you snap out of this ODD. Again, oppositional defiance disorder. I think you and I both have that, Dave.
Well, let me, I'm so glad you brought this up. It's such an important issue because it's going to really be brought to the forefront, I believe, in future days. Let's define a couple of terms before we go further. The DSM-5 stands for, just for the benefit of the audience, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the 5th edition, and it's relatively new. And then internationally, DSM gets transposed into something called ICD. I believe they're on 9 now. Don't quote me on that because I've been out of the practice for a while. But ICD-9 is the international flavor of how we categorize mental illness. It's like the Bible of categorizations of mental illness. Now, I bring this up because I want to go back into the 1970s and what the Soviet Union was doing that was such a heinous violation of the client-therapist trust, and it had to do with this mental illness they called political schizophrenia. And they said that, well, if you disagree with the government, you must be crazy. And they used this as the basis to arrest tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of Soviet citizens and sending them off to the gulags. Well, let's cycle forward now to the year 2015, and here we sit with DSM-5. Now, it was interesting, the international community controlling ICD-9 just went crazy over the Russians' misuse of ICD-9 to label people as political schizophrenics as an excuse to put them away and forcibly medicate them. Now we're looking at the reinvention in the modern era in the United States of ICD-9 violation of trust by basically creating another version of political schizophrenia. ODD is nothing but political schizophrenia, Soviet style, in disguise. It's the American version of it. And what they're going to eventually do is, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. Well, that's illegal. You must be crazy. We have to haul you off for treatment. And then you're never heard from again.
So essentially, this constitutes a new subjective approach in diagnosing mental illnesses that, would alleviate us from any political dissent. Essentially, they're saying, well, particularly disturbing would be anybody like Dave Hodges, Sheila Zilinsky. They're mentally ill because, after all, they're not politically correct. They're inducing political paranoia, again, a mental illness, schizophrenia, as you just mentioned it. So I guess under Obama's new proposed gun regulation, anyone who is potentially disagreeable, well, then look out, right, Dave?
You've got it, Sheila. That's exactly what they're in the process of setting up to do. I mean, you can't, so much of this is geared against the Christians. For example, in our religion, we don't teach to persecute homosexuals. We don't teach to persecute anybody. But what we are seeing, Sheila, that's very, very clear is the fact that if you speak on behalf of your religion and say, I'm sorry, but we can't endorse the practice of homosexual marriage, nor can we honor it because of our spiritual beliefs, it's not that we want to go after anybody. People have to stand before God on their own merits. It's not for me to judge, but it's not for me to also tell my 15-year-old son that this is acceptable behavior. It's not for me to embrace what I think is an unholy lifestyle, as defined by my religion. But now we're moving this into the arena of hate speech. If I speak out against Muslims, as we talked about, first of all, I'd never speak out against Muslims in a pejorative term, because I believe across the planet, people are people, and they're usually victims of their government. I'm talking about the extremist Muslims, the ones I want our government to know where they're at and to keep tabs on them and get them the hell out of our country. But if I do that, I'm going to be labeled to be an extremist. And this is where the ODD diagnosis comes in, because they can say, well, Dave, we just think that you're a little bit upset now. You've kind of gone over the edge, and here, come with us. We're going to put you in a straitjacket. And it's kind of like the mental health version of the NDAA. We're going to take you away to where you're never heard from again.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, how many constitutional freedoms have we lost? The government is arresting those speaking out and violently crushing even peaceful assemblies which attempt to petition the government for redress. You look at all these federal rulings, you look at the mass spying by the NSA that violate our freedom of association, and the threat of being labeled a terrorist for exercising our First Amendment rights. I mean, we've absolutely descended into tyranny here, Dave.
Well, I think there's absolutely no question about that. I just feel that, our free speech is being taken away in this regard. They're coming after the guns, and you name some of the amendments, and now we're getting into some of the substantive reasons that are behind what you said when we first came on the air tonight. I mean, First Amendment is tremendously under attack. The Second Amendment is under full frontal assault, and it's going to get a lot worse. And then the Fifth Amendment, due process. Well, if you have political schizophrenia, or ODD as a diagnosis, and you've got the NDAA for political persecution, you don't have a Fifth Amendment. You don't have due process. And then we get into cruel and unusual punishment. When you lock people away under the Eighth Amendment, okay, you're supposed to have fair and just sentences. Well, there's nothing fair and just about denying someone an attorney, a phone call, their day in court, and a jury of their peers. And then you've got certainly the federal government, just overwhelming state and local government, which violates the Ninth and Tenth Amendments. And then we've got one thing that a lot of people don't know, Sheila, and this is a good time to insert this. The 14th Amendment talks about equal protection under the law, and the 13th Amendment is the abolition of slavery. Well, the NDAA, the Executive Order 13603 that Obama issued in 2011 basically takes over everything in the country. You own no property. Your food, your furniture, the bed you sleep in, the clothes on your back, you own nothing under this. But in there is something very, very disturbing. Sections 501, 601, and 801 all reference basically the fact that there's going to be a two-tiered conscription system. One tier is going to be the traditional military draft, but it's all being run by the Secretary of Labor. And I said to myself, why the Secretary of Labor? Well, I looked at the second part of this conscription, and what they talk about, it's a civilian conscription for workforce. And in the language, and I'm going to quote the language, they use a term called consultants. And a consultant is someone who is conscripted into civilian labor brigades. They can be shipped anywhere to do anything. And in 13603, it says that consultants will not be paid. I want this to sink in, folks. This is codified by the president through what I believe are illegal executive orders, violating, basically the legislative authority of Congress. But this president has said, I can come and enslave you on my say-so. Now, you don't have to have a declaration of martial law to do this. This is strictly the president's authority that he has assumed. He decides what an emergency is, and he can simply come and take your property, your children, you, your spouse. You and your spouse could go off to different camps, and your kids become wards of the state. I mean, this is how draconian 13603 is. Folks, if you don't believe me, I've written probably, 5 or 6 articles on 13603. Please go to thecommonsenseshow.com, and I have a search engine at the top, and write in Executive Order 13603 and follow the link back to the original White House press release that shows the executive order in its totality, and you will see everything that I just said and a whole lot more is contained in the presidential release. And Sheila, I know you understand what I'm talking about. I'm speaking, to the people who might be new to this topic.
Yeah, well, they've updated long existing directives, even that were issued as far back as the Truman administration. But we're talking about confiscating private property, declaring martial law. I mean, it goes on and on. It's very frightening. And what's also frightening is what's rolling into town are very mysterious situations. It's not bad enough that fully armed military convoy are rolling down Highway 115 in San Bernardino over the last 24 hours. But the case of the mysterious abandoned chlorine railway cars, get into that, Dave.
Well, boy, this is a mouthful here, Sheila, and this is just an incredible story. My good friend Paul Martin from Northern Colorado, he's the head of revolutionradio.org and does a great job with that. Paul calls me frequently on breaking news stories, and he's wondering if I have heard this and wants my input, or he thinks I might want to look into something. So I did, and he called me on Friday. I wasn't able to get back to him till Friday night, and that's because of the fact that I was busy. My son had a recital, and we had our family things, and yada, yada, yada. So finally I get back to him, and Paul, what's up? And the story he told me was shocking, Sheila. It was shocking beyond belief. He has friends in a place called Pratt, Kansas, also located inside of Pratt County. And he said, you need to talk to Eddie and Lisa Protowski. Now, Eddie is a very, very well-educated man. He holds 2 college degrees, a lot of it nuclear energy related, but he's chosen the life of a farmer away from academia. His wife, Lisa, works for the local co-op, and I won't say they were frantic when I talked to them, but they were highly anxious. There was no question about that. Here's what's going on inside of Pratt, and this is news that's broken just in the last 36 hours. What we know is that there have been abandoned chlorine-carrying railroad cars on a defunct railroad, that the railroad is in such disrepair that no cars could move over 5 miles an hour. Now, the cars are empty, according to local law enforcement, of any chlorine. The Chinese are the manufacturer of these cars. Now, there are an untold number, dozens, perhaps hundreds, and they were laid on the defunct railroad tracks in such a way that they would be behind trees to partially obscure them from passerbys on the state highway that runs adjacent to the railroad tracks. Well, they started showing up there in the beginning of this year, about 11, 12 months ago. And people that are farming the area there noticed, so this became a topic of discussion with the local co-op in Pratt, Kansas. And they were very concerned because they recognized these cars for what they were. They could be potentially carrying chlorine gas. That's what it's made for. Now, this came to a head last week when these cars suddenly, mysteriously, and without any explanation began to move, and they blocked the highway, Highway 54 going into Pratt. They blocked the highway, and local law enforcement had to come out, and they had to basically clear the highway. They had to bring, hazmat teams out because they didn't know what they were dealing with. And the only thing that stopped these cars, these railroad cars, were other cars farther down the track on the other side of Highway 54, and because they ran into the back of them, and most of the farmers didn't even know that those cars were there because, like I said, it's on a defunct railroad, and they were hiding them behind a row of trees. And local law enforcement just was flipping out. Well, local law enforcement had conversations of friends of the Protowskis, and they were told that higher-ups had come in, but they weren't allowed to say who was coming in to manage the situation. Well, Sheila, you and I are capable of making phone calls, which I did, and I found out that the ATF had jurisdictional authority at first. They passed it on to the FBI, and now DHS has assumed control. Now, I don't know if these agencies are still there, but they were there. And what's interesting is the chief of police of Pratt is telling the local citizenry to please keep their eye on these cars. They're very concerned about a potential terrorist event. Now, before people say I'm making much ado about nothing, first of all, the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and I cited this in an article I printed on Saturday, December 19th, and in this particular study, they talked about using these toxic chemicals like chlorine in a terrorist event using old abandoned train cars. But it gets worse. I want to go across the pond, and I want to quote, I'm going to read to you some quotes here from an expert out of the UK, entitled, "Expert says ISIS is likely to initiate a chlorine attack on the UK and the US." And he was this expert, and his name is Hamish de Britton Gordon. He was asked a question that, could the Japanese terrorist organization known as Shinrikyo, and I forgive me if I mispronounce that, who carried out the sarin gas attack in the Tokyo subway 20 years ago and killed more than 13 people, could that happen in the UK or the United States? Now, this man has the credentials to answer this question. He was the former commanding officer at the Joint Chemical, Biological, and Radionuclear Regiment. So he knows what he's talking about. Here's what he said. So yes, ISIS could replicate the Tokyo gas attacks in the UK and US relatively easily. And then he goes on to say that terrorists that are entering the United States, ISIS terrorists entering the United States and the UK, will no doubt engage in chlorine attacks on places like the London Underground, in trains, soccer matches, etc. It's very evident that ISIS is putting much time and effort into training its jihadis in the use of chlorine as a terror weapon, and particular in IEDs. Virtually every foreign jihadi who comes into the U.S. and UK will have been exposed to training of this sort, and we will have a reasonable idea on how they will use chlorine and other toxic chemicals as we continue to watch these incidents unfold. And he goes on and says more, but you got the idea. Here's an expert saying, yeah, we're expecting this to happen. This has been on our drawing board when I was doing this job. And now we have this event in Pratt. Now, Ed Petrowski called me this evening before we went on the air, and what he told me is they've now concocted an official story that, these cars were just put out there to handle the ethanol that's being produced in the area. But ethanol is not chlorine, and these are specifically, these cars are chlorine-carrying vehicles. And no one can explain how these vehicles moved. I mean, they had the air brakes on. So even if the train got pushed, the air brakes should have kicked in and stopped it. Someone or something moved them. Well, and Sheila, this isn't the end of the story. After I published the article, within 3 hours, I already had 2 accounts from people that said, Dave, the same thing is going on in the countryside outside Erie, Pennsylvania, And Modesto, that surprised me too, Wineland, right in the middle of Wineland in Modesto, California. And I got detailed descriptions. Unfortunately, where Eddie Petrowski and his wife Lisa are willing to put their name on this story and stand by the strength of their convictions, the two people who wrote to me out of those two general areas were not quite so bold. And I understand we live in scary times, but if we don't stand up for what's right, we're going to get run over. But Sheila, this is really a disturbing set of events. Now, what I'm hoping is this, is that, first of all, I've run this on the Common Sense Show website, and it was widely distributed on Saturday the 19th by Steve Quayle, Before It's News, the usual cast of characters that pick up my articles. And we are airing a segment that we pre-recorded on Tuesday, December, what is it? I don't know, 21st, I think. But anyway, on Tuesday of the week of Christmas, we're airing a 15-minute segment on this topic. I'm hoping that the 2 million radio listeners that I have are going to become aware, ask questions, and act with outrage towards their public officials for not monitoring the store more carefully. And I'm hopeful that we can avert what I think would be, I think these cars were set out there. Well, let me give you an operating hypothesis that both Eddie and I agree with. We think it's very likely that these cars were set out there so terrorists could come along, put their own chlorine in there, and this railroads you could push the cars down, you could find a crossing railroad that's functional, couple them to an existing train coming down the second train track, and ride it right into Wichita, Kansas, and release this chlorine gas.
Well, I mean, look back over history. I mean, you have asphyxiating gases being used in Nazi Germany. You've got, the Assad regime accused of 35 chlorine attacks. John Kerry was absolutely certain that the Syrian government had attacked its own people with chlorine. You mentioned Japan 20 years ago, a shadowy cult poisoned the Tokyo subways. And then you have the Chinese accused of supplying the gas for Assad's forces who unleashed the chlorine gas on a civilian population. When you think about chemical attacks, Dave, effects of toxic inhalation is usually pretty agonizing and not very swift, is it?
No, it really isn't. It's so disturbing because, sarin gas and chlorine gas and all their first cousins, they're indiscriminate in their killing. They don't spare anybody or anything. They kill old people, women, children, everybody. And we live in such a sick world ruled by the Prince of Darkness that we could even have the threat of this going on. It's just amazing to me. The Hopis have an old saying, Sheila. It goes like this: there is no tree who is foolish enough to have branches fight amongst themselves. And that really kind of summarizes what's wrong with human beings.
Yeah.
Rather than looking at life through a cooperative viewpoint, we're here to love each other and to help each other and to assist each other to get through life and have a meaningful and enjoying life, a challenging life. We're out to steal from our neighbors, kill them when necessary, commit horrible acts of terrorism and violence upon innocent civilians like San Bernardino. It's so distressing. And the only answer that I have, there's not a political solution because this is a spiritual problem. The spiritual problem requires a spiritual solution, and every Christian needs to get down on the ground and pray to God that He'll forgive our heinous ways, the 60 million babies that we've murdered since Roe v. Wade, the fact that we have not punished Planned Parenthood for selling these babies' body parts. We need to pray for divine forgiveness. God will forgive us if we will come to Him in the right heart, but we've got to do it collectively as a nation.
Well, I concur 100%. And what does 2 Chronicles 7:14 say there? It says, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, will forgive their sin, and will heal their land. He's saying my people. He's not talking about atheists here. He's talking about my people. We really do have to get back to being a God-fearing nation again. believers do have to come together and pray, because I really believe if we take prayer more serious and really get back to our Christian principles, which this country was founded on. Final thoughts in the waning moments, Dave?
Sheila, I have a very foreboding feeling about the future of our country. This is why I want to say again, we need to remain in prayer, because we've got the irresistible force moving against the immovable object, and that will be the forces of Obama seeking to get our guns, because if we ever allow them to do that, it'll be Nazi Germany with concentration camps, but this time it'll be on steroids. And one thing I just want to remind people of, the benefactors of the president's political career, Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn. Bill Ayers told Larry Grathwohl, the late Larry Grathwohl, who was a special informant for the FBI, who penetrated the Weathermen, and he had a conversation with Bill Ayers. And he asked Ayers, he said, if you ever win, he said, what will you do? And he hesitated and said, we'll have to put about 50 million Americans in concentration camps in the Southwest, and we'll have to do away with over half of them. That's our future if we don't stand up and oppose this tyranny.
I was recently interviewed on a show, Dave, this week, and the host asked me, Sheila, what's your take on what we should do about this, terrorist group ISIS, and what's your thought on the whole banning Muslim refugees, etc.? And I said, what's my position? I have one position, and it's on my knees. And we can pierce the heavenlies, Dave, with our prayers. And I think about King David when he came to Baal Perazim and he was defeated there, and he said, the Lord has broken through my enemies before me like the breakthrough of waters. And over we see in the Bible, it explicitly lays out what God does to our enemies. And we as believers, we're the only ones, Dave, that can change things on earth. James tells us the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. And it is time to join in prayer against this ubiquitous evil that's permeated our world. And I would like people to stand in agreement with Dave and I, and we're going to do that now. We're going to pray. Father, we thank you for giving us power over all the power of the enemy. We exercise that power now, and in the name of Jesus Christ, we assign mighty angels that you have given to assist us to discover and expose every plot of violence, death, and destruction before it's put into action. Father, we assign mighty angels to stand shoulder to shoulder around the entire continent of North America with their flaming swords drawn, so no one with destructive agendas can enter in. And in the name of Jesus, we bind the strongman over ISIS and break his power. We bind and break the power, the spirit of the air that works in the children of disobedience. We bind the spirit of murder, suicide, death, violence, gross darkness, and destruction that's before us. We bind and break the power of the spirit of Ishmael, jealousy, hatred, murder, retaliation, and we forbid them to operate. We speak confusion to the enemy's camp, and we bind and break their communication lines, and we send out the mighty warring angels to scramble and cancel the enemy's plans. Cause the enemy to turn on itself and leave none standing, as happened in the Old Testament. And we cover ourselves with the precious blood of Jesus Christ, and we call on mighty angels to stand around us, our families, and your saints all over this world, shoulder to shoulder, that no evil penetrate. Your will be done, and God bless America. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Dave, I so appreciate you coming on the program, and do come back and see us soon. It's always a pleasure.
Amen to your prayer, Sheila, and thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Dave. Folks, that was Dave Hodges. You can check out his handiwork at thecommonsenseshow.com. Just a reminder, folks, if you have not picked up a copy of my book yet, Green Gospel, do so by going to greengospel.ca. There's also an ebook available if you like that format. It is a really timely book. And again, there's so much information in that book. And I do hope you go and check out the reviews at Amazon.com. Again, Green Gospel. It's a very good book, folks, so do pick up a copy of that. And don't forget to sign up for my YouTube channel. Go to weekendvigilante.com, follow me on social media, and do sign up for my podcast. There's a Podomatic button on the right-hand side. And in January, it's very exciting. The app will have all the kinks worked out, And so the Weekend Vigilante app will be ready to rock and roll. All the bugs are worked out, and it's going to be a fantastic app for smart devices. So do make sure to get that in the new year. As I said at the beginning of this program, there's a lot of changes coming to the format of my show. So you'll want to sign up for my free e-newsletter. That's right, free e-newsletter. I'll have all the details coming out before December 30th. There's a lot of new changes coming to the new show starting January 4th, 2016. And on that show, Steve Quayle is my guest. We have a fantastic show coming out of the gate in January. Lots of things on the horizon for 2016. Look for updates as well. It'll all be announced on my website, weekendvigilante.com. I hope you have a very blessed holiday season. Merry Christmas. We'll